here's the thing. When it came to making the next documentary for Different Level, I wanted to do something that we've never ever done on this channel before, something that was very, very much out there. So earlier on this year, I decided to get all my gear, put it into my lovely little car, and decided to travel around the UK looking for game developers to interview. More specifically, indie game developers. My mission for this documentary was to tell the stories of indie game developers in the UK, their experiences they've had, what it's like trying to create a game from pretty much nothing, not having the budget of AAA studios or having hundreds of people working on a single game, and overall give you, the viewer, a current sense of what it's like to be an indie game developer in the current climate. So, along with the best camera crew in the world, I brought along my girlfriend Lima and my very good friend Sam. This was the journey I wanted to take to really understand how indie game developers work here in the UK, how they come together as a community, and overall ask them why they wanted to do this in the first place. And I wanted to take you on the journey with me. So welcome to documentary number 4 from Different Level, where we meet the little guys and gals of the video game industry here in the UK and give you a behind the scenes of what it's like to be an indie dev. This is Making the Game.
I'm Yasmin Curren, and I am a YouTuber who started off playing games and then documented my journey making games. I've always played games since I was younger, but I didn't really know that I wanted to make them until, I guess, around college time when I took a media course. And it was a really cool course because we were on the radio, we were doing films, sound design, and I just kind of asked my lecturers, isn't games part of media? Because ultimately media is like storytelling in whatever form you can do that in. And gaming, to me, was kind of the pivotal of storytelling because it's interactive and immersive and everything. And he said, well, yeah, but making a game, there's like so many elements to it, and I'm a really competitive person. He was like, you can try and do it for a unit if you want. We can change the course for you, which looking back, I'm so grateful at him for doing that because, you know, he totally rearranged things. And I was like, yeah, so I tried it. I made a game in like 8 weeks, and I just remember having no sleep and just being sucked into things. And that was the first time I had to code as well. I was like, what is this weird language? I just knew this was what I wanted to be involved in. And that's probably why I didn't actually go straight to uni afterwards, because I was still confused about how to get where I wanted to be and where exactly that was. But yeah, I just knew I wanted to do something like that.
So I'm Kail Jefferies, and I'm a solo indie developer based in Bristol in the UK. I'm working on a project right now which is a neo-noir detective stealth game, but previously I've made a couple of other games, most notably Concrete Jungle from a few years ago, and then before that some smaller mobile projects which didn't really do that well. I started making games when I was actually quite young. I did a degree in illustration, moved away from it a bit because at the time it was just before like the indie boom, so it was kind of like AAA or nothing really. And I wasn't sure I kind of wanted to work in the industry at the time, but then when indies started taking off, it was just like, oh wow, it's kind of like I should give this a go. So I started as a hobbyist after my degree, and I just really enjoyed it, so I just kept at it, and it slowly grew into something resembling a sustainable career almost.
I'm Tom, and I'm a developer designer at Inkle.
I'm Laura, and I'm the lead environment artist at Inkle. When I went to university, I knew I wanted to work in graphics, but like games wasn't really a thing. Like I'd always played games, but it wasn't a job. Also, I thought at the time, this is quite a long time ago now, but in my final year, I had to do a project that was set by industry people, and I just chose the games environment one because it was the most interesting one to me at the time. And then when I got there, I was like, well, why should I work in games and not films, which is where all my friends are going? And they're like, it's that sense of ownership, that sense of being able to say, like, I made this thing. Like, you can run around it, you can play with it, you can like see it on shelves and in shops, and like it's that being able to have like a tangible thing that you made or you designed and had like a real input into that other people can play and experience all over the world in a way that film didn't really, like, especially when you're starting out. Film is very much like painting out telegraph wires and doing like, invisible work, and I wanted to do visible work.
I sort of grew up with Nintendo. I always really liked games, and it was always kind of like my astronaut job dream. It was the thing that I always wanted to do and almost certainly wouldn't, and I couldn't program, and like maths is boring. But by chance, I kind of fell into university doing a media degree, and I was sort of getting into film. I liked film. Around the time that the indie bubble, sort of 2008, really started to pick up steam, it was around that time I'd sort of not been playing many games. I'd kind of played everything, and I just kind of got jaded with it. And then, Braid comes out, and Meat Boy, and Fairs, and all these games, and they're really exciting, like stuff that I really wanted to play, and I didn't realise that games could do this stuff, and I didn't realise that people could go off and just make stuff. So I kind of started fiddling with Flash. And then when Flash died, I jumped onto Unity, and that's kind of how I got started, really.
So, if you're not up to date on the term indie in a video game sense, well, here's your little crash course on the history and the modern day rise of indie games. Indie games or independent games are commonly used to describe games being made by small teams, or in some cases, just by sole individuals. In the early days of video games, creating and distributing your own game was seen as a pipe dream for many up-and-coming developers who just wanted to get their idea out there. Bigger, more established companies were really the only way to get into the games industry. But due to the rising popularity of the internet, this all changed when shareware and websites became a thing, allowing almost anyone with the know-how to get their game out there without having to worry about shipping their games to potential players. And potential players didn't have to pay as much for indie titles too, compared to the standard pricing of AAA games. And most recently, the online distribution with the likes of Steam led to a huge indie game boom in the late 2000s, with games such as Super Meat Boy, Fez, and Braid.
Braid was probably the one where I was like, oh cool, these type of games are actually becoming big. Like, yeah, because they kind of existed, but they're always kind of like hidden away on the internet for and like kind of freeware, because people assume people won't want to pay money for them, because games have become this like kind of all that this AAA Hollywood blockbuster type deal, and it was almost like, oh, there's not a market for these games. But then that first wave of indie games like Braid and stuff that just really proved otherwise, and it was really exciting for people who were like, oh, I could actually maybe make something.
People were able to experience very new, fresh and unique game titles that weren't always about how great the graphics looked. Instead of making your game look like a AAA blockbuster, instead it was more focused a lot more on gameplay, taking more risks, and generally thinking outside the status quo of bigger games by bigger companies.
So my first game that I think made me realise that games could be more than just entertainment was Beyond Good and Evil. So when I was younger, I used to play a lot of racing car games, and then my dad was playing like Call of Duties and stuff, and we'd like kill things, and that was super fun, and I'd win in races. But then I played Beyond Good and Evil, and it was the first time I couldn't wait to come home from school just to be in this world that I felt super invested in. All the characters, I just fell in love with them. And so there were mechanics of the game where you had to take pictures of weird and wonderful creatures, and it really made you stop and actually appreciate what the designers and everyone had made. This wealth of emotions through playing that game, and I was like, this is crazy. I want to make something like this. I want to make someone feel the way that I'm feeling now. It's like when you get into a book, but even better because it's on a screen and you're doing the thing. Like, yeah.
Yasmin, or better known online as Yagmanx on YouTube, created her channel around trying to learn and create her ideas for games. While she's never got too close to actually releasing a full and complete version of a game just yet, the release of her demo, a game called Perfection, a first-person horror game about the thoughts and ideas on the term perfection, got the attention of many people online, which helped create a following for her ever since.
A lot of work has to go into a horror game to make it good. You have to think about a lot of different elements to make that work. I mean, that's why BioShock isn't even a horror game, but BioShock has some of the best horror elements because of the level design and the narrative and the audio, and just everything combined makes an amazing horror game, and it just makes you feel emotions that I don't think personally I can feel in the real world. Perfection is I guess it's something quite dear to me because it's something that I feel very emotionally connected with, just the idea of perfection and being perfect. Obviously, no one can be perfect, and perfect is unattainable and it's objective. So, trying to be a perfectionist is not really the best way to live, but for the longest time, I would say that I was perfectionist. I was like, I'm not perfect. Oh my gosh, where's this going? Yeah, I would describe myself like on my CV and stuff like that. But then I realized as I grew older, actually, this is not a good thing to describe myself as, or to even try to become. And I was like, okay, what if perfection was real? Like, what if you could make someone perfect? And then I love all the old trailers for Fallout and things like that, where it's like they're trying to sell you something toxic like BioShock.
Press to summon murderous crows. Hold and release to create a nest trap.
Something toxic, but they're making it really overly, this is amazing and your life is going to be the best. I was like, that's what it would be. It was like, oh, what could it be? Or it could be a headset. And maybe the government's made the headset, but then what would the mechanics be behind the headset to make you perfect? What makes you imperfect? Well, usually you think that you're perfect because you want to, reach something. And other things get in the way of that though, like friendships and being distracted by other things. I said this is a prototype of a game, so it was not a complete, fully finished, lovely game. It was just an idea that I had, a prototype, and I wanted to see if I could get it done, and yeah.
It may have been a prototype of a potential future game, but as soon as Yasmin released the demo online, something quite unexpected happened.
One of my really close friends loves Markiplier. He watches every video, and he just messaged me and he's like, Yasmin, your game is being played by Markiplier. What?
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome to Perfection. No, not me, not my beautiful face, not my flawless skin. Perfection the game. This is a game about perfection.
So I put it up there on itch just because I needed it somewhere so that I could show potential employers. And yeah, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tweet it out. I didn't make a YouTube video about it. Like I didn't do any social media marketing around it. And I went traveling to visit friends, I think, for a couple of days after I put it up. And then I came on social media again, and I was like, oh, people have been playing my game. What? How? I don't know. I mean, it was a crazy few weeks, and I was very happy, but I don't know how it happened.
I think back then when I first started seriously making it after my degree, I was trying to be aimed towards the art side a bit more because I had some kind of vague experience in that, and I just felt like that's what I should be doing. But the more I got into it, the more I got into the programming side, and I spent probably more time on that.
A few weeks before meeting Cole, I saw footage of his current game in development, a Deus Ex-inspired detective-style game called Shadows of Doubt, and I was immediately drawn to it. In actual fact, Cole has been making games since 2011, first starting on mobile. Cole released around 4 games on mobile, experimenting with different types of ideas and genres.
But in 2012 he released a game called Mega City, a unique puzzle city builder that will eventually spark the idea for his game Concrete Jungle, a game that went on to become his biggest success so far.
And then I remember around that time I was just experimenting with loads of ideas, and I had all these cool ideas that I wanted to put in like competitive mode. And I was like, oh, what if it was just like a traditional city builder? Maybe it isn't a sequel to this game, maybe it's like a pure city builder, but you're also like trying to screw each other over, and like is it a proper like kind of full-on multiplayer sim city with a weird competitive edge? And I experimented with all these crazy ideas before eventually deciding that it was like, okay, I'm being maybe a little bit too ambitious here. I need to take it back to pull in the focus a bit and kind of make a proper sequel to this game, which was at the time my most successful game to date. It's like, okay, need to like really focus in on what made that kind of interesting. It does have a lot of content and I'm really pleased with the game, but it's probably like I could have probably refined that a bit and maybe had slightly less stuff but more polished stuff. Although all that content was probably born out of like this fear that it was my first like proper game on Steam, and is this content going to be enough? I better like, work really hard and try and add all this stuff and make sure it's like people don't feel too shortchanged. I think I'd like to make a sequel to Concrete Jungle and maybe make it explore some more ideas I've had since then. But I think after I released it, and then the year later I ported it to Android and iOS, so I was still working on it for like a year after. I was just a bit like, okay, let's take a break, let's make something completely different and just explore a different avenue. That's why I'm making this project. It couldn't be more different, basically. I've been working on this for a while, 2 years, and it actually started out as more of a management game where you are managing detectives from this top-down perspective. And I found out like it's not, I kind of went through the kind of prototyping process and it's like, well, it's kind of more fun if you're doing these things. And I've got this 3D world and I've got a top-down camera, but what happens if I put a first-person controller in? And then it suddenly became like, oh, well, yeah, this is more interesting if the player does it. I'm really happy with the direction of the game, but it's taken a while to get here. But I've got a lot of systems in place that will probably, maybe this is naive of me to say at this point in development, but I think like the core heart of the game is there and it's working, and I'm quite pleased with that. So a lot of the remaining work is just adding content, especially in terms of missions. And I also want to, at the moment there's not really much to do other than this one basic job that you saw in the video, but the idea is that you'll have kind of serial killers to track down. It's kind of slightly more exciting angle on the kind of detective thing. I'm basically trying to use a combination of kind of handcrafted design with the procedural generation. So for example, within the buildings, if you imagine like a floor plan of a building, you might have like it sectioned off into different offices, for example. So that kind of basic floor plan is kind of handcrafted, but then the game will kind of put dividing walls within these kind of allotted segments. So you're kind of getting this weird mix of like, it's kind of makes sense and it's kind of designed from one perspective, but it's going to be like quite subtly different in a lot of other ways. Right. So the idea is to kind of make it not completely like cookie cutter procedural, just a bit more kind of more of a mix between the two. So I'm hoping that'll be kind of interesting. And then the characters are completely generated from you every time. So your game is going to feature different characters to your friend's game, and they'll be doing similar things, but they'll be different, and they'll have different little stories, different backgrounds, different interests, and places they work and places they go.
I just had in my first year of studying, I just had this affinity for animation, and then in the second year I sort of got bundled onto environment art because that's what nobody else cared about. Like everyone wanted to be an animator. And I suddenly discovered that like the backgrounds of the game, like the unimportant bit that nobody cares about, was like so huge and so expansive. And like I really love like history and I'm just really interested in the natural world and everything that kind of goes on around you. And like suddenly I just was like, actually this is where I belong. Like this, and, I get to research like all these really interesting things about how stuff's made and like different flora and fauna and building styles and architecture and like natural places in the world and cities in the world. And like it's so expansive, and I just love being able to lose myself in that. And so that was kind of like the beginnings of like my sort of environment art thing was kind of that project really, where it was like a French town square, and I got really into like, you know, the 18th century, what would like French cafes and things look like in the background, and like
So there's lots of research.
yeah, just really
looking up stuff.
I love social history. I think it's really interesting.
I mean, I always wanted to do the kind of the high concept thing, and after a while I kind of realised that was the least interesting part of game design, and it's all of the little things in a game that make it really click. And I kind of learned to program and to actually make things just as a means to an end, just because there was something I had in my head and I wanted to try it out. And it turns out programming is really Moorish. So I kind of fell into development, but always with an eye to actually producing something.
Inkle Studios found success in their 2013 release of Sorcery, an RPG text-adventure game based off the gamebook novels of Steve Jackson. Sorcery and its 3 sequels went on to find huge success in the mobile market, but during the development of Sorcery Part 2, the team at Inkle decided to create an adventure game based off Jules Verne's legendary novel Around the World in 80 Days. This proved to be, once again, success for Inkle, with many describing it as a huge narrative success, earning 4 BAFTA nominations in 2015 for Best British Game, Best Story, Best Mobile Game, and Game Innovation. This gave Inkle Studios the reputation of a studio that truly focused and cared about narrative in their games. It was at this point that Laura and Tom were about to join the team at Inkle.
So 80 Days had just come out, and I was kind of curious to who made this thing, and I looked on the website and these 2 guys, and it said that they were, you know, looking for other people to work with them, and I thought, ooh, I'm a person. And I applied, and we went to a coffee shop to do a little interview, and then I got the job.
Oh, what a story.
That actually sounds kind of similar to mine, but mine's a little bit more extended. So I worked for a big AAA company for a number of years and got made redundant. And shortly before that happened, I'd seen a talk by Meg Giants about 80 Days, talking about like the writing and how you can write a story about history but have an opinion on whether history did things right or not. And that whole like telling story from the non-white male protagonist's point of view and finding the untold stories. And I was like, I want to work for a company that cares about that kind of thing and does things right.
Do you know that 80 Days was supposedly the project between Sorcery as a kind of, let's just do something quickly in a couple of months, because we're sort of sick of doing Sorcery
Not
games.
recording this, so.
And obviously that sort of ended up being a year-long project, but obviously a really good move.
With Laura and Tom on board the team at Inkle, the team wanted to boldly take a step in a new direction, while still maintaining the focus and care on narrative that the studio was now well known for. What came of it after years of development was the 2019 release of the PC and PlayStation 4 title, Heaven's Vault.
So shifting from iOS to PlayStation was a really conscious move. It was kind of us trying to broaden our audience and to reach, I guess, more traditional gamers. Partly because we were curious to know if we could take on the, like, you know, Tomb Raider and Fallout and these big story-driven AAA games. And, you know, as people who make stories, we look at these things and we think, well, this is pretty good, but I think we could do a better story if we took out the bits that don't help. So, like, if you take out all of the survival management stuff, you lose something, but you're able to make the story so much better. So we thought, well, let's try to get the people who love these games and just deliver the best story they've ever seen. But I suspect when they started making those games, they knew that there would have to be like gunplay and platforming and stuff, because those are things that people expect in sort of massive AAA games. But we didn't need to sell that. We don't need to appeal to quite the same audience. And certainly when we play Uncharted, we play them more to engage with the story, and like the shooting is fun and all, but I think if it wasn't there, we wouldn't miss it quite as much as some other players. And so we were trying quite consciously to target the sort of players who play these games for the story, people who maybe put them on easy mode because they're not interested, or just people who think this story would be so much better if they weren't constantly shooting each other.
Actually, that's what my experience is as well, like having come in halfway through the project. When I arrived, and having worked on a lot of projects in the past that are very much like, we've got this cool mechanic, we want to build a thing around it, and like the story kind of gets shoehorned in afterwards in some ways. So that's kind of like the other end of the scale. Like obviously Uncharted and those kind of games do like a really great job of telling really cool stories, but then I've worked on like the other end where like there's not really much going on in some ways. And like, you know, sometimes that matters and sometimes it doesn't. If there's a great game there, then it's a great game. But like, when I arrived at Inkle, it was very much a case of like, we're telling a story and everything else supports the story. Coming from like an environment design perspective, like it wasn't like, oh, we need to make a really great shooting arena. It was like, this is the story that happens in this. How do I tell the story through what I'm building? That was just a really, like, it was complete like 180 flip about how to think about what I was building, and a great challenge for that. Like, it's just a really different way of working, I think. Trying
to tell a story with real people, so people who actually look like people without sort of having to use an art style that maybe, you know, something an art style that allows you to animate these characters and really bring them to life, make them feel like people, but without having to model 3D characters, which is incredibly expensive. And just drawing them allows you to make them do things that you wouldn't be able to do with 3D technology, at least on our budget.
And you can get such a diverse range of characters where you don't need to worry about like, oh, I need to make a different rig for this kind of person, or like I don't need to do all the rigging and reskinning and stuff. We can just be like, oh, I need a person that looks like this, and then you draw them and then they're there. And that's kind of really freeing, and I think like Annie can just come up with anyone she likes as long as they fit into the world.
I don't think we ever counted the number of sprites, but there must be at least 1,000.
Like, at least 1,000, like hand-drawn sprites for the characters,
One of the most ambitious ideas and main gameplay mechanic of Heaven's Vault was that the game includes its own language called Ancients. As players play through the game, they slowly start to understand how to read certain characteristics of the language, to the point where people who have finished the game know a whole new language created by the team at Inkle. I asked Laura and Tom if they ever thought that making a game about understanding a language would turn players off the game.
I don't think we ever worried that people wouldn't like it, although it's totally optional. You can be wrong. You can be absolutely wrong about the language all the way through the game, and the game never explicitly tests you on it and says, oh, if you don't know this word, you won't be able to continue. Certainly, if you are better at the language, you'll have a much better time because you'll be able to engage with game's lore. Yeah. But we very consciously built it in such a way that you were allowed to be wrong the whole time. And in fact, we almost encourage that in a few places. It's fun if you have to revise your assumptions.
I think it's really interesting. I know there are others like Sethian, I think, has got a language in it, but like I'd not personally played anything where you had to like look at this thing and decode it from nothing. And we've got people on our Discord channel that write in Ancient now. They've also been scouring the internet and possibly the game code for but there's like a spoken version of Ancient as well, and they've basically figured that out too. So they like occasionally will post something and we're just like,
We've got some weird fans.
They're brilliant. They're absolutely adorably lovely. And just, they've made like a language channel where they've got a bot that they can use to translate stuff. Like some people are like, some people don't want to engage with it, and that's kind of fine. But then we've sort of found this manically, obsessively, wonderfully brilliant group of people who are like, I am dissecting every last inch of this language that I can.
Getting to speak to these devs about their history of game development gave me a lot of insight into how games get made. But I also wanted to see if there was a community or events for these devs to come together in one place from around the UK, to meet, network and celebrate this industry. And while I was in a certain city, there was only one place I could go.
Hello and welcome to sunny Brighton, where we've taken a slight detour in our documentary to bring you to Develop in Brighton. It's a unique conference in Brighton where developers, publishers and media come together once a year in Develop in Brighton to discuss potential opportunities, business inquiries and even talk quite a lot.
Develop is a 3-day event in July that not only allows small and big developers to showcase their games, but the event is exclusive to only people who work in the industry, allowing for a more personal meet and discussion between devs about their games. With the likes of E3 becoming more and more open to the public, Develop gave me a sense that this event was purely made for the people behind the games, to discuss ideas, and a great way to bring everyone together once a year. They also had free ice cream, which I guess helped. Develop also has many talks and speakers for all 3 days, ranging from how people made their games, how to market your studio or brand, or even discussing mental health as a developer. While we were on the Unreal Engine show floor, I bumped into the guys at Try Hard Interactive, an indie studio based in Manchester, as they were showing off their game in development called The Ottoman Empire.
So I'm Simran Whittam, and I'm the founder of Manchester Gamers Unite. I'm one of the directors of Try Hard Interactive.
My name's Kieran Rogers, and the company I work for is Try Hard Interactive. I'm also managing director and creative director straight out of university. We all graduated together. Actually, Simran was a year behind us, but 3 of us graduated together, and we decided to build a community-driven game developer. What that means is we wanted to build games around a community. And that's why we kind of got involved with Simran as well, because he runs Manchester Gamers Unite.
Manchester Gamers Unite started off as a small pub meet-up for gamers and game developers, and it started off that for its first year, and since then we've kind of escalated very quickly, and now we're the Northwest's largest community game event and games industry party, and now we're kind of at a maximum of seeing 800 to 900 attendees per event at its current state. And what we kind of specialise in is community-driven development, bringing together gamers and game developers in a way that's not been done before.
And since then, Manchester Gamers Unite has become part of the company structure. It's like one half of our business. But originally it was just a chance for us to play test the game on a monthly basis in front of like a dedicated community of gamers.
It's very unique. I always compare developers. It's kind of the closest thing the UK games industry has to a festival for game developers. This is kind of our festival effectively. So it's very, very unique, and it's kind of a place where we all get together, have fun, network, show our games off, and just have a fun time.
We love every minute of it. It is harder than we first anticipated, coming into it all kind of naive of what the industry was really like, but it's a really supportive industry, and over the past 2 years we've gained a host of contacts and friends and colleagues that support everything that we do. So kind of supportive is another point really, that we don't feel like we're the only ones doing this. We feel like every development team is going through the same things as the market changes and as the market becomes more saturated. Like people with 25 years experience are coming to support us, even though we've only been in the industry for nearly 3 years now. So.
I've known other people who have tried to make games and stuff like solely on their own, or I've even worked with people before trying to make games, and they had a tendency to kind of go off the radar a bit, and I'd ask them how they're doing, if they're okay, and they just wanted to do everything on their own because they didn't want to show any work when it wasn't up to a certain type of standard. But then they really struggled to get it to that standard because they weren't asking for help or asking for someone else's opinion.
Yeah, I kind of, it's hard to say for sure, but I do feel, especially because I started on mobile, and I wouldn't really like to be starting on mobile now because I feel like that market has got quite saturated. And it's probably happened on Steam and other platforms as well. I think it's probably much harder to start nowadays than it was when I did.
Yeah, I guess it's easy to get frustrated at how long it can take to develop a game, to get to a place where you see it and you want it to be. I think a lot of people focus on the look of a game over the gameplay mechanics, and that's just detrimental, because if your game mechanics don't work right and then you've spent so long making it look amazing and it's unplayable, then what's the point?
If you enjoy making stuff, it's a dream job, and I'm not a good day goes by where I'm like, I can't take this for granted because my next game might not sell, and I won't get to do this anymore. So I will always maintain that it's an awesome job, and I'm very, very, very lucky to be able to do it full time. I really enjoy working, and I want to work some more, but maybe it's time to have a break now, burn out, and it can be quite hard to stop working on it sometimes because it's your baby and you want it to succeed and you want to put all this effort in, especially if you're a solo dev. So I found that quite hard in the past, and I think the other thing as a bit of an introvert is like taking on the marketing side and just putting yourself out there, because if you want to sell anything you just kind of have to bite the bullet and just do it.
I said at the start of this that I wanted to make this documentary because I wanted to meet the indie game developers and get a behind the scenes of how they make their games. These developers do what they do because they have an uncontrollable passion for video games. They love to create, and they love to know that people love their games too. I set out on this journey to learn about the process of making a game, but what I found was something much more. I found a culture and a scene that everyone is proud of. I found risk takers. I found fears about the future, especially in the UK. I found people who are truly passionate about the games they make. The games we play, big and small, all have hard-working people behind them, and in the age of the internet and an overcrowded market, that can get lost on us from time to time. But it's important to remember where your games come from. People spend years of their lives trying to craft the next hit that everyone will talk about. And while sometimes that doesn't work out, they love what they do because this is their dream and they don't want to give up on it. All in all, these independent devs and many others around the world want to do one thing: make games for people, make people happy to play them, and hopefully inspire the next generation of game developers. So I asked everyone before I left, what advice could you give to someone who wants to do this?
It's great to make anything that you possibly can, all the time, because it's fun and you'll learn. But if you're going to make something that you want to spend time developing, that you maybe want to sell, or that you intend to use as kind of part of a pitching process, make something that no one else is making. If you make, say, a shooter that's inspired by Call of Duty exists. It's going to be hard to top that. But if you make something that doesn't exist, or hasn't been seen for a long time, or just looks different, feels different, then people will remember it as your game, and you're able to make a space for yourself.
Then just do it. Just have an idea, a simple idea, keep it simple, and just play, just have fun. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, because Unity's free, Unreal is free, there's so many free softwares there, and if you have a computer and you can start to mess around with it, just do it before you even start looking at jobs or courses or anything like that. Just start learning on your own, because there's so much free resource there.
I'd say absolutely go for it, and make sure you have a really cool, interesting idea, because I think the advantage you'll always have as an indie is the ability just to make cool stuff without having to worry, please shareholders, or kind of worry about that stuff. So I'd say, just find something a bit unique that you think is really cool and that you're really passionate about, and just go and make it. Like,
believe in what you're doing. Like, that so many people, I think, don't want to share their work because, and to be honest, I'm one of them. Like, I hate the internet. But they don't want to put themselves out there for fear that they're going to get judged, and that's rubbish, and that's a symptom of social media and all that kind of nastiness that can be. But don't doubt that you're good at what you do.
Hopefully you'll be able to and get some experience from it, and I'm sure some people at least will find it and think it's really cool, and you'll be able to build on it, and just kind of, as long as you keep sticking with it and you have these cool ideas and you're able to execute them, then you'll get better and you'll learn and you'll gain traction and you'll gain fans, and hopefully you'll be able to establish yourself.
This industry actually is pretty overwhelming. As people will tell you, it's hard to get into, but once you get in it, it's really rewarding and it's always changing. You'll never be bored. However, it's hard work and it's not for everyone. So if you start to make a game yourself, then you get a better understanding of kind of what you're getting into. And if you're finding it fun, then that shows that this definitely is the industry for you.
Be rounded, be broadly interested in things. I'm definitely if you've got one thing that you absolutely love, then do that. Don't do that to exclusion of all else. Take an interest in the world around you, and the politics that are around you, and the news stories and the issues that are affecting your daily life and the daily life of others, and bring those to your work, as well as making what you want to make, like, you know, tell stories, be relevant to the world, I suppose. And that's kind of hard to like ask of people because it's huge. Like, you know, people want to just sit in their little corner and go, nothing else affects me. But like, I think the more awareness we have of what's going on around us, and the more we can bring that awareness to what we're doing, I think can make things better for people.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Thanks.